I'm Peter McKay. I'm the principal of Paralowie Art of 12 School. We're an Art of 12 school in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, Category 2. Very high levels of disadvantage, so we have high numbers of students who come from non-English speaking backgrounds, high number of Aboriginal students, large number of students who are in care, and also a significant number of our families who are struggling financially. The first thing we had to think about was communication. So communication with the staff is obviously okay because we can do that through email or personal, but communication with our community is really high priority. And when you're working in a disadvantaged community like this, that can be problematic because we know that we've got a reasonable percentage of our family that don't have internet connectivity, so therefore no email address. However, most of our families have access to mobile phones, so we have a messaging system that we have in place anyway, but one of the tricky things is that we know that our parents won't read messages that go over one page. So we had to make all of our communications trimmed down to about 160 characters so that we knew that it would get a single page on their phone. So there was multiple communication strategies. So every family got a message on their phone to alert them to some documentation, either coming home with the students, coming home in the post, and or being sent by email for those parents that had email. So that's the first part of it. The other thing that we know is that about 38% of our students come from non-English speaking backgrounds. So not only do we have to send their communications home in English, but we have to send them home in some of the other major languages that are spoken at home as well. So that adds another layer of complexity. We're very lucky in that we employ quite a large number of BSSOs, and they are very supportive, particularly in this particular situation. Have been really supportive about helping us get documentation translated so that our non-English speaking families are getting the right information, because I get concerned that if we send stuff home with the students and rely on the students to transfer the information when they get home, particularly in a health crisis like this, we don't want the wrong information to be passed on to parents. So that was probably our highest priority, was to make sure that we had really good communication strategies in place for our parent community, as well as obviously keeping staff updated. Obviously then we started thinking about, so what's the learning going to look like? We quickly realised that in the worst case scenario, if they were to close the school because we had a case here, what is that going to look like? But then even if that didn't happen, we knew that there would be a percentage of our students who would remain home. Parents would keep them home because either the parent themselves are vulnerable, the child might be vulnerable, or just simply that parents were scared. And particularly some of our non-English speaking parents who are refugees who've come from other countries where they've had significant health crises, they in particular have responded in terms of wanting to keep kids at home. For us, it was a really a whole new world, to be honest, because we didn't have any online learning platform at all. We have a student administration system, DayMap, which we just mainly use for marking attendance, for keeping student notes, and for a messaging system. But only had a very, very small number of secondary staff who'd sort of had tried using that in other ways. Nobody in the primary was using DayMap at all. And in fact, we didn't really have a learner management system in the primary apart from Seesaw and Class Dojo, which are really just communication tools and not really learner management apps. So that was the first, I guess, big significant piece of work for us. If we're going to be in a situation long term where students are not going to be coming face to face, what's that going to look like? And so we started investigating what some other platforms might be for us to be able to maintain that, but also recognising that with the percentage of our families that don't have internet access, what are we going to do for those families that don't have internet access, and how we were going to keep them connected. Because we didn't have an online learning platform, we didn't have any of the documentation that goes with it. So there wasn't any, if you like, guidelines around working online. We didn't have any, we had the standard e-safety practices for kids who are engaging with the internet, but nothing around video conferencing or engaging in any of those other online learning platforms. So it was a really really steep learning curve for us, and the first thing we had to do was establish what did we need and what was that going to look like. So we decided that the day map solution was tricky because we didn't have enough people with a high enough level of training to be able to actually lead the learning across the site. So we decided that we would use Microsoft Teams. We've had a number of staff in the school who were starting to explore Office 365, and so Teams have been some work that we've done. While it's not an online learner management system, it provides the opportunity for us to be able to connect with the students through their online tools, and obviously we felt that we could get access to reasonable levels of online training because the department has some really good resources available, and Microsoft themselves have some really good resources available. So we thought that was probably the best tool for us in terms of an online platform, so we ventured into that space. So once we'd established that we needed to do something about online learning, but we were also recognising that a percentage of the community didn't have that. So what we did was, for the primary students who didn't have access to any devices, we produced hard copy online learning materials. The next issue around that was, well, how are we going to get them home? Because the post clearly is too slow. So we had two approaches there. One was using the communication tools. We had advised parents materials were available, so parents were willing to come in and pick them up. And for those families that couldn't make the trip in, we were lucky enough to have a number of SSOs who were willing to provide their time to be able to run the packs out to our home. So that's how we got our hard copy materials home, predominantly for primary, but also for a number of our secondary students who didn't have any online access. In terms of the online learning tools, same thing, set them up, and basically what we found was that teachers were really engaged in actually developing and honing their own skills to be able to do the work. Everyone just rallied to the cause, really. So I had a group of young leaders who it gave them an opportunity to really step up and demonstrate some strong leadership, particularly our learning area leaders, our younger learning area leaders across their learning area, and support teachers to be able to develop not only the technical skills of the online platform, but what do the materials look like, because they look different to what you would do in the classroom. The other thing is that the school's improvement priority is reading, because we know, and our research shows us, that we have very low levels of reading across our site. And so the challenge for teachers now was, not only do you need to provide the online learning materials, but you've got to provide them in a differentiated way so that students at home with lower levels of reading can actually engage with and understand the work, because you're not there one-on-one to be able to provide that support for them. So when you reflect back on it and look at the learnings that's taken across the school, it's been a lot, and it's been very steep. And I am really fortunate and very proud of the fact that I've got a staff that decided that just needed to be the work, and they just got on and did it, really. We didn't really have to steer that learning focus back because we'd never take our eye off the ball. So one of the conversations that we'd had a lot with leadership during those early days of transitioning into online learning and knowing not unsure what it could look like moving forward was, while we have to keep our students engaged with learning, we also have to make sure that we keep them engaged with our learning improvement work. So one of the things that we did was, in particular, because our focus is reading, one of the things we did was make contact with the publishers of all of our levelled reading text to find out whether or not they were going to allow us to waive the copyright laws to allow us to be able to photocopy materials and send them home, because we obviously couldn't send home the hard copy readers. So we had a good response from a number of those publishing companies. So we were able to copy material and send them home, so we still had the focus on reading. And in addition to that, a lot of teachers did a lot of work exploring what else was available out there in the online world, and so we came across a whole bunch of materials that we probably wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Now, whether or not they are perfect and whether or not they're the right tool going forward, I don't know, but at the time they provided us an opportunity to make sure that with everything else that we're doing, we still were able to make sure students understood the clear focus of improvement in the school was reading, and that hadn't gone away. I think I stepped from leadership into management mode, to be fair. And so what it was, the communication strategy was a good thing. I just sat down and mapped out what I thought the communication strategy needed to look like, shared that with my senior leadership team. We sharpened that up. I also recognised that we needed to spend some time getting really clear about some really good guidelines for teachers, particularly around how we're going to record student attendance, not just in terms of who comes to school, but who's engaging from home. What are we going to do about following up our vulnerable students? And so I released a team of leaders and teachers to meet together to put together the Paralawi version of the guidebook for working your way through the COVID-19 phase. We were really fortunate in that at that time, I think one of the things that happened was that schools in the state who are really down the track in the online learning world were happy to share all of their materials. So there was lots and lots of materials moving around on the secondary principals networks and through the primary principals network, and so we didn't have to invent the wheel. What we did was we were able to take a range of those resources and pick the eyes out of the stuff that worked well for Paralawi, put that together into our own documentation, and so we're able to put something together in basically 2 days. So I released people, teachers and leaders, a group of 2 days, focused work, fed it out to staff, collected the feedback, refined it, and that's pretty much been the set of guidelines that we've been using moving forward. The next interesting thing that's happened is we've learnt that there are some students who are producing higher quality work out of the online environment than we were seeing perhaps in the traditional face-to-face environment. I don't want to lose the impetus that we've got now. We've got staff who are now exploring new pedagogical practices and new ways of doing things. So how do we really start to embrace, the blended learning approach, which is when we get all of our students back, which is what we really want, everyone to be back here. When we get them all back, how do we embrace the new learnings that we've got through the online platform and use that to support the face-to-face work that we do in the classrooms? Because one of the things that I think that we have struggled with in the past is, high numbers of vet students in the school. How do we keep them connected with their learning because they miss work when they're away on their vet? High numbers of vulnerable kids as a result of very difficult family circumstances. How do we make sure we keep them connected? In the past, we've probably struggled a bit in that space. I think now we've got a whole new range of ideas and strategies that we're going to really push forward and explore. And I think that, if anything, the COVID-19 crisis has probably forced us into a space that we needed to go into and wanted to go into. But when you're doing everything, you're finding the time to do that. The student-free days at the end of last term made a big difference because that's allowed us to get that stuff in place. The fact that people have had to develop their technical confidence in being able to use that stuff, again, helps us to be able to move further forward. So I think the learning and the new approaches will be taking everything that we've taken and putting that together into better packages to work for all kids in better ways. I guess the next step is it's now about the pedagogical practice. So how do you change a pedagogy that works from a straight face-to-face environment to that blended environment while you've still got all the students in the room? How do we make use of that online environment so that we can have more differentiated learning in our classrooms? I've been quite thankful for the support we've received from our department, in particular from the ICT people. When I went to them initially and said, help, we don't have anything, what are we going to do? They were the people who supported me to think, well, maybe Teams is the way to go, and they've been there. I can't think of an occasion when I haven't asked for some support and some advice, either from our local education team or from central office, that hasn't been forthcoming. The local education team have been fantastic as well. I mean, they've done a lot of work to support us in terms of developing materials for online learning. And I think the people that deserve the most thanks are obviously the staff, because I've been very, as I said before, very fortunate to have a team of people who just understood that the work needed to be done and it still needed to happen. And the reason we're all here is because we want the best outcomes for our kids. And as our school motto says, achievement for all. And circumstances have changed, but we need our kids to be successful, and so we just have to work to be able to make that happen.